welcome to the IIMB CCGC session on cybersecurity and risk governance. We have three speakers, Professor Raghunath, Mr. Toby Simon, and Corinne Vermack, who's joined us from Sydney. Professor Raghunath is a chairperson of the Center of Corporate Governance and Citizenship at IIM Bangalore and is a specialist in strategic alliances and strategic leadership. Professor Raghunath is on the board of directors of several corporates and ex officio member of the IIM Board of Governors. Our second speaker is Mr. Toby Simon. He's the founder and president of Synergia Foundation, has 30 years of experience in international affairs, counterterrorism, and an expert in cybersecurity. Our third speaker is Corinne Vermack. She started her career as a technology law specialist within telecommunications space at Cisco. Corinne specializes in cybercrime legislation and data privacy. She is the academic director of CyberSharp and most recently head of Cisco Women in Cybersecurity. I would also like to introduce her colleagues in Cisco, Prabhajit, Vasu, and Vishak, for supporting us in our cybersecurity and governance initiatives. Professor Raghunath will speak on why cybersecurity risk governance is critical for board members. And over to you, Professor.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to all of you. We at the Center for Corporate Governance and Citizenship have this unique pleasure of welcoming you all on this topic, which is of critical importance, as we all know. We have a very distinguished panel this morning, and I'm really looking forward to an excellent set of discussion points for all of us. The Center for Corporate Governance and Citizenship in this research and dissemination effort has been very ably supported by Cisco, and we have Mr. Vishak Raman from Cisco here. Would you like to raise your hand? Okay.
Hello, Prof.
And Madam Corinne Vermack, and of course, Mr. Toby Simon, who has also joined us on the panel. And the center actually has launched on a research initiative on looking at what do boards have to do very differently from what they have done in the past, primarily because the context today is not just brick and mortar. However much a business may be focused on a brick and mortar kind of a focus, it has nevertheless, because of the pandemic, been pushed into considering the digital part of their efforts to gain focus as they go forward. So what I'm going to share today are a few thoughts on what this is all about at the board level perspective. And I would now request for a screen share, if that is possible. Is that visible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
The screen share is visible?
Yes, sir.
The screen share is visible. Okay. Right. So as I was mentioning to you, this is the recent orientation in terms of a research program that we have just mounted with the able support of Cisco, and before we really report on the results, as it is an ongoing process, we are going to talk to you about what have we found in the context of boards as being very relevant in this perspective. So when we look at boards per se, boards actually have a focus on the validation process. Boards are there primarily as overseeing mechanisms for wealth creation and wealth appropriation in business corporations, as all of us know. And when they are focusing on the executive management pertaining to wealth creation, boards consisting of both independent and non-independent directors scrutinize actions and transactions and check for potential abuses. And today, those areas include cyber attacks. When boards actually perform the other function of figuring out how fair is the wealth appropriation, and they look at financial reporting and they have surveillance mechanisms in place, starting with board independence, audit committee independence, compliance assurance, cyber risk assessment and mitigation has been recently added or being brought to the notice of existing boards. So in the board role of strategy formulation, performance monitoring, top management planning, risk management and internal control, communication policy, and the value framework, they are today focusing on the triple bottom line as to what is the responsibility of the corporate, not just to profits, but also to people and to the planet. So we all know, there are a fair bit of very senior colleagues and participants here today who are very conversant with this role, right? So the fundamental initiatives in the COVID-19 context have pushed companies, whether they are brick and mortar or they are in the digital space, into enabling seamless connectivity, into managing to secure access, into providing for team collaboration and productivity trackers. And a recent survey on what are the following initiatives that your organization is likely to consider as top business priorities, this is a survey in India, really pushed up the ante in terms of focusing on reducing costs, accelerating shift to digital business, embracing corporate social responsibility practices, accelerating response to business and market changes, and improving use of data insights in business decision making, and with better compliance in the areas of regulation and requirement. When the survey had the next set of questions on what are the technology initiatives in your IT organization that you will prioritize over the next 12 months, the highest priority obviously went to developing smart connected products or connected assets enabled by Internet of Things. So we are now facing up to a reality where boards sit for their quarterly meetings and they do a review. They are realizing that organizations are transforming today with data. It is not just products. It is not just the variety in services. It's not just the changing bundle of functionalities, but pretty much within the organization to deliver those products and services and functionalities, they are now relying much more on data, which exposes the insides of the organization to, as we all know, to cyber risk and governance becomes a critical aspect. And therefore, they are discovering that this is a three-pronged approach to people within the company, to the processes within the company, and the technology that they are willing to bet on. And obviously, as we all know, that navigating today's landscape is a daunting task. While we are all investing in digital innovations, leveraging data and relying on global supply chain growth, we are quite aware that cyber threat actors are looking for creative ways to disrupt digital systems and information. So some recent data breaches, as all of us know, it's all been all over the news. Big basket, data of 20 million users, data breach at Dr. Reddy's laboratories, administrative network of the plant of the Nuclear Power Corporation of India in Tamil Nadu, and data over about 100 million users of local search service Just Dial, which was made available. So all of this has been happening, and we are quite aware of it. And then as professionals, we also know that there are indirect entry points through Internet of Things, connected devices, weaknesses in third parties along the supply chain, and therefore cyber risk teams within organizations are looking beyond the four walls in their efforts to implement and maintain an effective cybersecurity strategy. Building a better cyber culture is one of the, I think, the mandates that boards have, and to ensure that that happens. And there is a learning from transformation at Equifax that some of you are probably aware of. So I want to play a very short clip of the CISO of Equifax and what does he have to say about what they do. Sandeep, is that is the audio on?
Let play once.
Yes.
As we've kicked off this transformation, it's founded on a strategy that's predicated on four key principles: customers, culture, controls, and compliance. So the first principle is focus on customers. And what we're doing here is really putting an emphasis on transparency. But we're also taking an active effort to be able to communicate the lessons that we learned with the goal of ultimately helping to rise the tide to lift all boats. What I've learned in my experience is that culture truly does drive the security of an organization. And so one of the things that we've done in this space is to implement what we call a security performance measure for all bonus eligible employees throughout the company. So for example, if I'm walking the halls and I meet someone on the team and I say, who's responsible for security? If they point back and say, hey, Jamil, you are because you're head of security at Equifax, then I have failed my job because security is everyone's responsibility. Our third key principle is controls. And what we're trying to do here is focus on the fundamentals. We want to be world-class as it comes to those basic organizational security controls. Our fourth key principle is compliance. Now that we have achieved key certifications such as ISO and our SOC 2, we're evolving to be a risk-based organization. And what this allows us to do is to be able to focus our attention and our resources on the highest risk assets in our organization and apply fit-for-purpose controls to ensure that we've protected these assets to the best degree possible. As we all know, transformations are difficult. So by grounding ourselves on these 4 C's, what we're allowed to do is to be able to simplify our decision-making, prioritize more effectively, and ensure that we're all aligned as we drive this journey to become the most trusted security and privacy organization. As we've kicked off
So the other smart thing that they have done is to make cyber a component of their employees' compensation plan. And they have established metrics to really measure this across various parts of the business. And they're planning for how they would mature on these benchmarks and reward people accordingly. And what the CISO feels here in wake of the cyber breaches in the American history, that it has been a blessing and a curse, because this has come into such major focus, especially with the Justice Department officials actually tracing it back to government-sponsored attacks.
I'm here to announce the indictment of Chinese military hackers, specifically 4 members of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, for breaking into the computer systems of the credit reporting agency Equifax, and for stealing the sensitive personal information of nearly half of all American citizens, and also Equifax's hard-earned intellectual property.
So
I'm here to announce.
So what they got was a simple jump in their budgets. 1.25 billion to improve their technology infrastructure, and they've just been hiring people for the first 8 months of their transformation. So a survey in the mid 2020s about the nature of these breach types found that 82% are e-crime and 18% are nation state sponsored. And this other survey about ransomware and nation attacks have thrown up very alarming results. About 56% of the respondent organizations suffered a ransomware attack in the last 12 months, at an average of about 1.1 million in USD was paid as ransom as demanded by these attackers. 58% of these respondents are more concerned about China as they are about Russia delivering a devastating nation-state attack on their organizations. And 79% of them are at a point where they have an overarching security strategy and architecture, and they are now moving positively towards this as a result of the pandemic. And this has been an excellent orientation in terms of this change which is happening. But the survey also pointed out to 4 separate reasons as to why organizations are being targeted by these nation state sponsored cyber attacks. And that is primarily to do with access to valuable customer data, financial and intellectual property gain, to take advantage of vulnerabilities caused by the pandemic, and the intelligence. For instance, if an organization makes a product or for a government, and all of these have been the major reasons. And therefore, coming back to the Equifax example, they were able to figure out the key controls and processes, and they aggregated all of them into an index score, and they had an independent party come in and validate it. So this kind of an effort allows the board to benchmark performance against peers and set off a competitive index, so to say. So the prime motto here is that, as you all know, as CISOs know, that security isn't just security's job. Security is a evolving responsibility for the entire company. So when we are talking about culture, we are actually looking at performance management objectives, and it is important that this is included so that the managerial process is able to then dovetail all its efforts in moving the company towards better security. And the strategy rests in large part of the organization on the cybersecurity and information technology teams. Of course, a strong cyber risk governance framework. And that is true because governments, boards today have overarching cybersecurity responsibilities. And it is important for boards to actually have their attention at these risks in order to navigate the cybersecurity landscape and respond appropriately, because finally the accountability extends to the board. And the SEC regulations are very clear that disclosures regarding a company's cybersecurity management program and how the board engages with the management on cybersecurity and allows investors to assess how a board of directors is discharging its risk oversight responsibility is a mission critical theme today. And therefore, it brings us to defense mechanisms, and it is in this very increasingly complex and chaotic environment, it is necessary to establish a more robust framework. And obviously, as we have been discussing, that really encompasses people, process, and technology. And at the board level, the people part of the equation becomes extremely important as a consideration in establishing a cultural framework which focuses on security. And this, as you know, requires communication up and down the organization as well as ongoing education program. It also requires an understanding of the board, senior level executives and others, and the preponderance of this practice of exchanging documents and information. So all of us know that process is all about rules, regulations, and oversight, and the board has a responsibility to ensure that in terms of focusing on appropriate risks, organizations' cybersecurity costs have today reached unsustainable levels. So it is important to recognize how different groups operate and give them the autonomy and the flexibility to get work done while addressing cyber risk. And this is something that at the hierarchical level, at the level of appreciating the nature and the tenor of delegation in organizations, is something that the boards have to be cognizant and sensitive to. And technology obviously involves putting the right systems to automate processes and making them smart and effective. And it is the mechanism for enforcing those risks and procedures as well as detecting risks, which becomes so very cardinal in moving forward. So where does it all culminate? It obviously culminates in strategy, because strategy is the key. When organizations effectively balance process and technology, it is then possible to establish a synergistic framework that will fully address the cybersecurity context. And it becomes much easier to match risk objectives with workflows and cultural components and some of the best practice approach to cyber risk governance. Now, let me quickly address what could be the 10 board level cyber risk board practices that we really have to look at if we need to change the board and orient it towards addressing this current. At least one or two board members should have a solid understanding of cyber risk and cybersecurity. All directors, and this I think devolves upon the CISOs to ensure that this discussion does come up in board matters, that all directors should possess a basic understanding of the issues and have to leverage educational opportunities to stay current on evolving threats and tools, build a robust communication channel between the board, CEO, key senior executives such as the CIO, CISO, and the CSO, and ensure that an efficient framework is in place to inform the board immediately upon any of these incidents that occur, and to use dashboards to communicate cybersecurity performances and to evaluate the extent to which the strategy and the cyber spending are aligned with it, and to make cybersecurity a regular agenda, allocating sufficient time, which is a very, very critical and a crucial aspect, allocating sufficient time to questions on cyber risk topics, and periodically invite to these board meetings internal and external experts to present their advice to the board and identify best practices amongst the leaders and successfully implementing them, and look at sustainable strategies to stop, find, and fix these cyber threats. And to initiate discussions and to make sure there are follow-ups in seeking independent assessments in terms of the implementation of the cybersecurity framework, to identify the strengths and weaknesses in the system, and establish high-level metrics to evaluate organization cyber risk and cyber security protocols and strategy, and establish a board committee dedicated to cyber risk oversight. And last of all, for organizations and their CISOs to engage with law enforcement, industry peers, and the government. So this, in short, is what I would like to present. As I was mentioning to you, our own research, which is field data based, is a work in progress. We've been able to address 13 organizations, starting from multinationals in India with their dedicated facilities, to Indian conglomerates, and to companies which are in the services area. And we hopefully will be able to complete that this year and present our findings in that context.